Tonight we leave the bright halls of Olympus and travel downward, beneath the mountains, beneath the roots of olive trees, beneath the deep foundations of the ancient world. Our journey is into the complete story of Hades, eldest son of Cronus and Rhea, brother of Zeus and Poseidon, keeper of the dead, lord of hidden riches and king of the silent realm below. His name has often been spoken with fear. In later centuries, Hades was sometimes confused with ideas of evil, punishment, or a devil beneath the earth. But the Hades of Greek mythology was not the enemy of the gods, and he was not the source of all wickedness. He was one of the gods himself, stern, remote, powerful, and necessary. His kingdom was not a place of endless flames for every soul. It was the great unseen country to which almost all mortals traveled when life was over. Hades rarely left his realm. He did not sit often among the feasting Olympians. He did not cross the sky in a bright chariot or walk openly through sunlit cities. His presence was felt in quieter things, in the darkness beneath the soil, in the wealth hidden in stone, in the fatting of autumn fields, in the solemn promises made by the River Styx, and in the ancient mystery of death. Yet Hades was more than a shadowed king. His story begins long before he received the underworld. It begins with the first powers of creation, with earth and sky, with the rise of the Titans, and with a fearful father who swallowed his own children. Hades was one of those children, held in darkness before he had ever seen the world. He would later fight beside Zeus in the great war against the Titans. He would receive from the Cyclopes a helmet that made its wearer invisible. He would draw lots with his brothers and become ruler of the realm below. There he would sit beside Persephone, queen of the underworld, whose yearly return to her mother became one of the most important stories in all of Greek mythology. The tale of Hades is therefore not only a tale of death. It is a tale of division and order, of loss and return, of seeds sleeping in winter earth, of memory and forgetting, of wealth buried beneath our feet, and of the boundary that even heroes cannot cross without consequence. As we begin, let the modern world soften at its edges. Imagine the ancient land of Greece beneath a moonless sky. The villages are quiet. Lamps burn low behind stone walls. A shepherd watches the stars from a hillside. Far away, the sea folds gently against a dark shore. Below all of this lies another landscape. There are caverns no living traveler has mapped. Rivers flow through endless dusk. Pale fields stretch beneath a sky with no sun. At a distant gate waits Cerberus, the many-headed hound. Beyond him are the halls of Hades, where the dead gather like leaves carried by an autumn wind. This realm is not reached by one single road. In myth, caves, lakes, cracks in the earth, and remote capes could all become entrances. The Greeks sometimes looked upon a deep opening in the ground and imagined that it continued farther than sight, perhaps all the way to the kingdom below. And in that kingdom, upon a dark and solemn throne, sat the god whose name people often avoided speaking. Settle in now. Let the room around you become still. We will follow Hades from the dawn of creation, through the age of the Titans, the war for the cosmos, the division of the world, the coming of Persephone, and the long reign of the unseen king. The path is shadowed, but it need not be frightening. For in the oldest stories, darkness is not always evil. Sometimes it is simply the place where roots grow, where seeds wait, where treasures sleep, and where every journey eventually comes to rest. And so, beneath the quiet earth, we begin. Chapter 1. Before Hades, the first depths. Before there was an underworld ruled by a crowned god, before the dead crossed rivers or stood before judges, the universe began in mystery. The ancient Greeks spoke first of chaos. This was not merely confusion or disorder. It was a vast opening, a yawning emptiness, a space without clear shape from which the first beings emerged. From chaos came Gaia, the broad earth, foundation of mountains, valleys, forests, stones, and all that grows. Tartarus also appeared, the deep abyss beneath the world, remote and terrible. Eros came too, the power of attraction and creation, drawing beings together so that life and generations might continue. There was also Night, called Nyx, a dark and ancient goddess whose children included sleep, dreams, doom, and death. To the Greeks, these were not only conditions or ideas. They could be imagined as living powers, members of a divine family that filled every corner of existence. From Gaia came Uranus, the starry sky who stretched above her. Earth and sky became the parents of the Titans, the first great generation of gods. They were vast beings associated with the oldest structures of the cosmos, the heavenly lights, the oceans, memory, law, time, and the cycles of nature. Among them were Oceanus and Tethys, Hyperion and Theia, Coeus and Phoebe, Creus and Iapetus, Themis and Mnemosyne, and at last Rhea and Cronus. Gaia also gave birth to beings more strange and powerful. There were the Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths of divine force, and the 100-handed ones, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Uranus feared these children and forced them deep within the earth, causing Gaia great pain. So Gaia planned rebellion. She made a sickle of unbreakable metal and asked which of the Titans would act against their father. Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious, agreed. When Uranus descended to cover the earth, Cronus struck. Sky was separated from earth, and the open world came into being between them. There was now room for air, weather, birds, clouds, and the lives of future gods and mortals. Cronus became ruler of the cosmos, and the age of the Titans began. But power gained through fear rarely rests peacefully. Uranus foretold that Cronus would one day be overthrown by his own child. The prophecy followed Cronus into his kingship. He remembered what he had done to his father, and he began to see the same danger in the children not yet born. Cronus took his sister Rhea as queen. Together they became parents to a new generation. Their first child was Hestia, gentle goddess of the hearth. Then came Demeter, who would rule grain and harvest. Then Hera, future queen of Olympus. The fourth child was Hades. We do not have a long ancient story of his birth. The moment is almost hidden, as though the silence that would later surround him had already begun. Rhea gave birth, perhaps hopping for one breath of peace, one chance to hold her son beneath the open sky. But Cronus came. Terrified of prophecy, he swallowed the child whole. Hades vanished into his father. After him came Poseidon, and he too was swallowed. At last Rhea gave birth to Zeus, the youngest. By then her grief had become resolve. With the help of Gaia, she hid Zeus in a cave on Crete and gave Cronus a stone wrapped in cloth. Cronus swallowed the stone, believing the final threat had been removed. But the threat was growing in secret. For Hades, the first chapter of existence was darkness. Before he ruled the unseen world, he himself was unseen. Before he received the dead, he waited in a living prison. Before he guarded the boundaries of his kingdom, he was trapped behind a boundary he could not cross. The myths do not describe what the swallowed gods experienced inside Cronus. Perhaps time did not pass there in the ordinary way. Perhaps they slept like seeds buried too deeply. Perhaps they heard only the slow, distant thunder of a divine heart. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon remained alive because they were immortal. Yet immortality without freedom must have felt like a still and endless night. This early darkness became part of Hades' story in a way that feels almost symbolic. Of all the children of Cronus, he would later receive the realm most hidden from sunlight. His first home was within his father. His second would be beneath the earth. But these were not the same. Inside Cronus, Hades was a prisoner. In the underworld, he would be king. The change began when Zeus reached maturity on Crete. With the help of the wise goddess Medes, Zeus prepared a drink that would force Cronus to release what he had swallowed. Zeus entered the Titan king's household, perhaps disguised as a servant or cupbearer, and offered him the potion. Cronus drank. The stone came forth first. Then the swallowed children returned, one by one, into the world. Hestia emerged, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. For the first time, Hades looked upon the sky. Imagine that moment after so much darkness. The brightness of day, the cold movement of wind, the great shape of mountains, the smell of earth and salt water. Beside him stood the siblings he had known only through silence, and before him stood Zeus, youngest in birth but now the one who had freed them all. There was little time for wonder. Cronus still ruled, and the Titans would not yield without war. The children who had been swallowed now gathered together. They had been denied a childhood, denied a place in the world, denied even the right to be seen. Their rebellion was not only a struggle for power, it was an answer to imprisonment. Hades, quiet and formidable, took his place beside his brothers and sisters. The hidden child had returned. And soon, the darkness that had held him would become a weapon in his hands. Chapter 2. The War of the Titans and the Helmet of Shadow. The war between the Titans and the younger gods is known as the Titanomachy. It was imagined as a conflict so vast that mountains trembled, seas rose, and the air itself seemed to burn. The Olympians established their stronghold on Mount Olympus. Cronus and the Titans held Mount Othrys. Between those heights, the struggle continued for 10 long years. Hades fought beside Zeus and Poseidon. Although Zeus stands at the center of most surviving accounts, the victory belonged to all 3 brothers and to the allies they gathered. The Titans were older, immense in power, and deeply rooted in the first order of the cosmos. The younger gods needed more than courage. They needed the help of those whom Uranus and Cronus had imprisoned. Deep in Tartarus were the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones. Gaia advised Zeus to free them. The Olympians descended to the lowest places and broke their chains. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged 3 gifts. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt, bright enough to tear open the sky. For Poseidon, they made the trident, a weapon that could command seas and shake the earth. For Hades, they made a helmet. It is sometimes called the Helm of Hades, the cap of invisibility, or the Helm of Darkness. When worn, it concealed the wearer not only from mortal sight, but even from the eyes of gods. This gift suited Hades perfectly. Zeus received the force that announces itself in light and thunder. Poseidon received the weapon that churns the visible sea. Hades received the power to move unseen. Invisibility is a strange form of strength. It does not roar. It does not demand attention. It changes the world through absence. An unseen presence can pass through guarded places, approach without warning, and act before an enemy knows danger is near. During the final battles, Hades used the helmet against the Titans. The ancient sources give few details, leaving the imagination to move through the mist. Perhaps he crossed the battlefield beneath its shadow, slipping past lines of immense divine warriors. Perhaps he struck at weapons, gates, or leaders while hidden from view. Perhaps the Titans felt the air grow cold and knew only that one of the swallowed suns had returned for them. The 100-handed ones hurled stones in great volleys. Zeus filled the heavens with lightning. Poseidon shook the foundations of the world. Hades moved unseen. Together, the younger gods broke the power of Cronus. The defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, the abyss beneath even the realm that Hades would later rule. The 100-handed ones became their guards. Bronze gates and walls were imagined around them, deep beyond the reach of ordinary souls. Cronus, the father who had swallowed his children to escape fate, was overcome by the very children he had tried to erase. For Hades, the victory had a special shape. He had been trapped in darkness by Cronus, and now he helped close Cronus within a deeper darkness. Yet Greek myth does not tell us that Hades took pleasure in revenge. He is rarely portrayed as laughing over the fall of enemies. His nature is more reserved. The war ends and he turns toward the duty that follows. The universe needed to be divided. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, cast lots for the great realms. The earth and Olympus would remain common ground, though Zeus would become king of the gods. The lots decided the rest. Zeus received the sky. Poseidon received the sea. Hades received the underworld. It is important to pause here, because later retellings sometimes suggest that Hades was banished below or unfairly condemned to a lesser kingdom. The older myths do not clearly say this. The realms were assigned by lot. Hades did not lose a contest or receive a punishment. He became sovereign of 1/3 of the ordered cosmos. Still, his portion was different from those of his brothers. Zeus looked out over clouds, daylight, stars, and the high air. Poseidon ruled the glittering surface and hidden depths of the sea. Hades received a kingdom without sunrise, filled with the souls of all generations. He would rule more subjects than either brother, for every mortal life moved eventually toward his gate. The realm was called by many names. It was Hades after its king. It was the house of Hades. It was the underworld. It was the unseen place. The god and the kingdom became so closely connected that the same word could mean both. Hades accepted the lot and descended. We might imagine his journey as the first royal passage into the depths. He leaves the high mountains where the Olympians celebrate victory. The sunlight narrows behind him. He passes through a cavern where cold water gathers on stone. The sounds of the living world fade. Roots descend from trees above like dark threads. Far below, a river moves through mist. He carries the helmet of shadow, but he no longer needs to hide. This kingdom is his. In later stories, other gods borrow the helmet. Athena uses it during the Trojan War. Perseus wears it in his quest against Medusa. Hermes may use it in battle. The helmet becomes a symbol of the underworld's power entering the world above. Silence, secrecy, and the ability to pass beyond ordinary sight. But Hades himself becomes increasingly invisible without it. He rarely appears in epic adventures. He does not wander constantly among mortals. He remains in his palace, ruling the dead and guarding the laws of passage. This distance gave him a special kind of authority. Zeus could be persuaded, distracted, angered, or charmed. Poseidon might rise in fury and then grow calm. Hades seemed less changeable. Once a soul entered his realm, departure was almost impossible. Almost. A small number of heroes and divine beings would descend and return. Heracles would come for Cerberus. Orpheus would come for Eurydice. Theseus and Pirithous would come with a reckless plan. Odysseus would seek the wisdom of the dead. Each story would reveal something different about the king below. But before those travelers arrived, Hades had to establish the order of his kingdom. He had to become not merely a god who lived beneath the earth, but the ruler of death's great country. And that country was wider, stranger, and more varied than a single field of shadows. Chapter 3. The Kingdom Beneath the World. The underworld of Greek mythology was not described in one single, unchanging map. Poets, storytellers, mystery religions, and philosophers imagined it in different ways. Over centuries, its rivers, fields, judges, gates, and regions became part of a vast dreamlike geography. At its entrance stood Cerberus, the hound of Hades. Cerberus is often described as having 3 heads, though older poets sometimes imagined many more. Serpents twisted around his body, and his bark guarded the boundary between life and death. He allowed the dead to enter, but he did not willingly allow them to leave. This was the central law of Hades' realm. Passage flowed inward. The gate itself was not evil. Cerberus did not hunt innocent souls for pleasure. He was a guardian, performing the same duty that walls, doors, and watchmen perform in the world above. Every kingdom has a boundary, and the boundary of Hades was the most serious of all. Beyond the gate flowed the rivers of the dead. The River Styx was the most sacred and feared. Its name was associated with hatred or horror, but its deeper power lay in the oath. The gods themselves swore by the Styx. If an immortal broke such an oath, terrible consequences followed. In some traditions, the god would lie without breath for a year and remain excluded from the divine feasts for 9 years more. Why should the river of the underworld hold authority, even over Olympians? Perhaps because death is the boundary no promise can ignore. Perhaps because the deepest waters of the cosmos were older than the reign of Zeus. The Styx reminded the gods that their order rested on something solemn beneath them. There was Acheron, the river of sorrow or woe across which the dead were often carried. There was Cocytus, the river of lamentation, echoing with grief. There was Phlegethon, a river of fire, flowing not as earthly flame but as a strange brightness through the depths. And there was Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. To drink from Lethe was to lose memory of the former life. For some souls, forgetting might have been a mercy. The pain of separation, the unfinished hopes, the names and faces left behind could soften into quiet. Yet memory was also precious. In certain mystery traditions, the dead were instructed to avoid the waters of forgetfulness and seek another spring, the water of memory, so that the soul might retain knowledge and move toward a blessed fate. The underworld was therefore a place where remembrance and release met. At one of its rivers waited Charon, the ferryman. Charon was not Hades himself, though later images sometimes confused them. He was an old and grim boatman who carried the shades across the water. In ancient burial customs, a small coin was sometimes placed with the dead, traditionally understood as payment for the crossing. The image is quiet and enduring. A narrow boat moves across dark water. There is no wind. The passenger has left behind the noise of life. The ferryman says little. His oar enters the river and rises again, making the only sound. Those without proper burial were sometimes imagined as waiting restlessly on the shore, unable to cross for a time. This belief gave urgency to funeral rites. To bury the dead was not merely to dispose of a body. It was to help a person complete a journey. The Greeks cared deeply about this duty. Even enemies deserved burial. In tragedy and epic, denying burial could become a serious offense against gods, family, and the order of the world. Once across the river, the dead entered the broad country of Hades. Many came to the fields of Asphodel, a dim meadow where ordinary souls continued in a pale and dreamlike existence. The asphodel was a flower associated with uncultivated ground and the dead. It did not create a vision of intense punishment or heavenly delight. It suggested stillness, memory, and the fading outlines of earthly identity. The greatest heroes and the especially blessed might reach Elysium or the Elysian fields. There, life was gentler. Breezes moved through meadows. There was no harsh winter, no exhausting labor, and no grief like that of mortal life. In some traditions, Elysium lay at the far edge of the world rather than deep below it. In others, it belonged within the wider realm of the dead. Later ideas spoke of the Isles of the Blessed, where favored souls might dwell in peace, perhaps after more than one virtuous life. These visions changed across time, showing that Greek thought about death was never entirely fixed. Tartarus lay deeper still. Tartarus was both a primordial being and a place, an abyss far beneath the ordinary underworld. The defeated Titans were confined there. Certain great offenders against divine law were punished there as well. Tantalus stood amid water that withdrew whenever he bent to drink, beneath fruit branches that lifted away whenever he reached for them. Sisyphus pushed a stone toward the top of a hill, only to watch it roll down again. The Danaids, in later tradition, carried water in vessels that could never remain full. Ixion turned upon a fiery wheel. These punishments were exceptional. They belonged to figures whose offenses had become mythic symbols. Greek Hades was not simply a universal torture chamber. Most souls were not Sisyphus or Tantalus. Most entered the quieter regions, becoming shades among countless others. Hades ruled over all these places, but he was not always the one who personally judged each soul. In later traditions, 3 mortal kings became judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Aeacus. Because they had been known for law or kingship in life, they continued to weigh human deeds below. Their exact roles varied. Sometimes Rhadamanthys judged souls from Asia, Aeacus those from Europe, and Minos settled difficult cases. Sometimes Minos alone held the final vote. The underworld also held the Erinyes, or Furies, ancient spirits who pursued serious crimes, especially bloodshed within families and the breaking of sacred bonds. They were older than many Olympians, born from the blood of Uranus in one tradition. In the world above, they chased the guilty. Below, they remained connected to justice and consequence. There was Hecate, mysterious goddess of crossroads, torches, night, ghosts, and magic. She moved more freely than Hades between realms and became especially close to Persephone in the story of her return. There was Thanatos, the personification of death, often imagined as winged and solemn. There was Hypnos, sleep, his gentle brother. There were dreams, shadows, and the countless dead themselves. This is important. Hades was not death. He did not usually come to end a mortal life. That role belonged more directly to Thanatos, to the fates, or to the ordinary causes of the world. Hades received the dead after the thread had been cut. He was not a hunter of souls, but their king. His palace stood somewhere within this immense realm, described with gates that were difficult or impossible to open from within. The ancient poets called Hades strong, unyielding, and rich in guests. Every generation increased the number of his subjects. The palace was dark but not empty. There were halls, attendants, thrones, chambers, and the quiet machinery of an eternal kingdom. Hades sat there with his scepter, and after Persephone came, with a queen beside him. From the surface, mortals feared the journey. From the throne below, Hades maintained its order. Day after day, if days could be counted there, the rivers moved. Charon crossed. Cerberus watched. The judges listened. New shades arrived and vanished into the dim fields. The kingdom did not sleep, because death never stopped. Yet it did not hurry. In the underworld, all the urgency of mortal life became distant. The ambitions that once filled palaces, ships, and battlefields were reduced to memories. Kings and servants, warriors and farmers, poets and children all passed beneath the same gate. This equality gave Hades a solemn dignity. His law was the one law no wealth or status could permanently escape. And still, Hades was also called the Wealthy One. Chapter 4. The Rich One and the Unseen God. The name Hades is connected with the unseen. To speak of him was to speak of the one who is hidden, or of the hidden place itself. Ancient Greeks often avoided saying his name directly. This was not because they believed he was evil, but because names could attract attention. A farmer might pray gladly to Zeus for rain or to Athena for wisdom. To call upon the Lord of the dead felt more dangerous. So Hades received other names. One of the most important was Plauten, later Pluto in Latin. The name means the wealthy one, or the giver of riches. At first this may seem strange. What wealth belongs to a god of the dead? The answer lies beneath the soil. Gold, silver, iron, copper, and precious stones come from the earth. So do the seeds from which grain rises. The ground receives what is buried and returns new growth. The same hidden world that holds the dead also holds treasure and fertility. Hades therefore possessed a double character. He was lord of endings, but also master of the deep resources from which life is sustained. His kingdom was dark, yet it was not empty. It contained the wealth of ages, the bones of ancestors, the roots of forests, the sleeping seed, and the metals that humans shaped into tools and crowns. This connection softened his image in some forms of worship. As Plauten, he could be approached as a generous power of abundance, but even then, reverence remained careful. Hades was often shown as a mature, bearded god, seated upon a throne and holding a scepter. Sometimes he carried a cornucopia, the horn of plenty overflowing with fruit and grain. Sometimes Cerberus stood beside him. In art, he could resemble Zeus or Poseidon because the three brothers shared royal dignity. The symbols around them revealed the difference: thunderbolt, trident, or hound; eagle, dolphin, or dark throne. The cypress became associated with Hades and mourning. The narcissus flower belonged especially to the story of Persephone. The pomegranate, with its many red seeds, became one of the strongest symbols of the underworld. Black animals were sometimes offered to chthonic gods, the powers beneath the earth. Sacrifices could be made into pits or low altars, so that the offering traveled downward rather than rising in smoke toward Olympus. Worshippers might strike the ground with their hands to draw the attention of the god below. Yet Hades had fewer temples and festivals than many other Olympians. His distance was part of his nature. He was not a god people wished to invite casually into daily life. There were, however, places where the boundary between worlds seemed thin. Caves, volcanic openings, deep lakes, and regions of strange vapor could be treated as entrances to Hades. These places were sometimes called Plautonia or Charonia. At Eleusis, near Athens, the mystery rites of Demeter and Persephone offered initiates a special understanding of death and hope beyond it. Hades belonged to the sacred story at the heart of those rites, though the details were guarded in secrecy. The mysteries are difficult for us to reconstruct, because initiates promise not to reveal what they saw and heard. But ancient writers suggest that participation changed how people felt about death. Through ritual, darkness, light, loss, and return, they encountered the story not merely as listeners, but as part of a sacred journey. Hades, then, was both feared and necessary. He stood at the edge of speech, religion, agriculture, and family memory. He was also known for being unyielding. Other gods could be persuaded to change their minds. Hades could negotiate, but he guarded his law closely. Once the dead entered his kingdom, he did not release them easily. This was not mere cruelty. If the gate opened freely, the order of life and death would collapse. The most famous exception involved Persephone. Another involved Eurydice, for whom a single path back to daylight was offered under a condition. Heracles was allowed to borrow Cerberus, but only if he mastered the hound without weapons and returned him. These exceptions prove the strength of the rule. Hades' firmness also appears in the story of Asclepius. Asclepius, a son of Apollo, became so skilled in healing that he could restore the dead to life. To mortals, this might seem like the greatest gift imaginable, but to Hades, it threatened the balance of the cosmos. If death could always be reversed, his kingdom would empty, the natural order would fail, and the boundary between mortal and immortal would vanish. Hades complained to Zeus. Zeus struck Asclepius with a thunderbolt, though Asclepius later received divine honor and a place among the stars. The story is not simply against medicine. The Greeks deeply honored healing. It asks instead where healing ends and immortality begins. Even the most compassionate power must exist within limits. Hades represented those limits. He did not need to be angry to enforce them. His authority was quiet. A door closed, a river flowed, a name moved from the list of the living to the numberless company below. Yet the unseen king was not without emotion or desire. There was one figure who changed his lonely kingdom more than any other. Her name was Kari the Maiden. She would become Persephone, queen of the dead. Chapter 5, Persephone in the Meadow. Before she was queen of the underworld, Persephone was the beloved daughter of Demeter. In some stories she was called Kori, meaning simply the maiden. She belonged to spring fields, flowers, youth, and the bright world above. Her father was Zeus, and her mother was Demeter, goddess of grain and the fertile earth. Demeter's love for her daughter was deep and protective. Together they embodied the living bond between seed and soil, mother and child, growth and renewal. Hades saw Persephone and desired her as his queen. The oldest surviving hymn tells us that Zeus agreed to the marriage without Demeter's knowledge. This detail is important. In the divine family, Zeus held authority, and ancient marriages could be arranged between male relatives without the bride's mother being consulted. Yet the myth does not hide the suffering caused by that decision. One day Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow with the daughters of Oceanus. The scene begins in beauty. There were roses, crocuses, violets, irises, and hyacinths. The grass was soft. The sky was clear. The young goddess moved among her companions, filling a basket with blossoms. Then she saw a narcissus of extraordinary brightness. The flower had been placed there as part of the divine plan, grown by Gaia at the will of Zeus to attract the maiden. Its fragrance spread through the air. Its many blooms shone like a small wonder rising from the earth. Persephone reached for it. The ground opened. From the gap came Hades in a chariot drawn by immortal horses. He seized Persephone and carried her downward as the earth closed behind them. Her cry traveled across the world. She called to her father Zeus, but no answer came. She called to her mother. Demeter heard only the distant sound, not knowing where her child had gone. The chariot descended through shadow. The meadow vanished. Sunlight narrowed to a line and then disappeared. This is the darkest moment in Hades' story, and it should not be softened into a simple romance. The ancient hymn describes an abduction. Persephone did not choose to leave the meadow, and Demeter did not consent. The story belongs to a world in which daughters could be separated from mothers through marriage, entering another household and becoming almost like strangers to the homes of childhood. Myth enlarges that human grief until it changes the seasons. Hades carried Persephone into his palace and offered her a throne. He promised that, as his wife, she would rule beside him over all that lived and died. Those who failed to honor her, he said, would face her lasting power. This promise matters. Persephone was not to remain a powerless captive forever. In later myths, she appears as a formidable queen, receiving heroes, enforcing laws, and commanding respect. Yet her first descent begins in fear and loss. Above, Demeter began to search. For 9 days she wandered the earth carrying torches. She tasted neither ambrosia nor nectar. She did not bathe. She asked gods and mortals whether they had seen her daughter. Hecate had heard Persephone's cry but had not seen what happened. She joined Demeter, and together they went to Helios, the sun god, who sees all things beneath his light. Helios told the truth. Hades had taken Persephone, and Zeus had permitted it. Helios tried to comfort Demeter. Hades, he said, was a powerful bridegroom, her own brother, ruler of a third of the world. But such arguments could not heal a mother's grief. Demeter's sorrow became anger. She withdrew from Olympus and disguised herself as an old woman. She came to Eleusis and sat beside a well, hidden beneath a veil. The daughters of King Celeus found her and brought her to their home, where she became nurse to the infant Demophan. Demeter tried to make the child immortal. By day she fed him divine food. By night she placed him in the fire, burning away his mortality. But his mother, Metnera, saw the child in the flames and cried out in terror. Demeter revealed herself in divine glory. She commanded the people of Eleusis to build her a temple. There she remained, separated from the gods, grieving for Persephone. Then she stopped the growth of grain. Seeds lay hidden but did not rise. Fields remained bare. Plowing became useless. Hunger spread across the mortal world. Without harvest, humans would die, and without humans, the gods would lose the offerings and honors that linked Earth to Olympus. Demeter's grief had become a cosmic force. Zeus sent gods to persuade her to return. They offered gifts and honors, but she refused. She would not allow the earth to bear fruit until she saw her daughter. At last Zeus sent Hermes to the underworld. The messenger god descended through the hidden roads, past the rivers and gates, into the palace of Hades. There he found Persephone beside the unseen king. The time had come for a bargain between worlds. Chapter 6. The Pomegranate and the Return. Hermes entered the palace of Hades, carrying the command of Zeus. The underworld king listened. He could not openly refuse the ruler of Olympus, especially when the life of the mortal world had begun to fail. Demeter's famine threatened the whole divine order. Hades agreed that Persephone could return to her mother. In the ancient hymn, he spoke gently to her before she left. He told her not to remain sorrowful and reminded her of the honor she would possess as his queen. She would rule over the dead and receive reverence among immortals and mortals alike. Then came the pomegranate. Before Persephone departed, Hades gave her seeds from the fruit of the underworld. She ate them. The number changes across later retellings, sometimes 1 seed, sometimes 3, sometimes 6. The oldest surviving account does not focus on a precise number. What matters is the bond created by eating food from below. To share the food of a realm is to belong to it. Persephone climbed into a chariot, and Hermes guided her upward. They passed through the gates, crossed the shadowed roads, and rose at last into daylight. Demeter saw her daughter and ran toward her. The reunion is one of the warmest moments in Greek myth. Mother and daughter embraced. For a time, grief vanished in simple presence. Persephone had returned. The face Demeter thought lost was before her again beneath the open sky. But Demeter soon asked a careful question. Had Persephone eaten anything in the underworld? Persephone told her of the pomegranate. In the ancient account, she says that Hades secretly compelled her to taste it. Other traditions describe the moment differently, sometimes making the choice more ambiguous or even voluntary. Myth changed as it traveled, and later storytellers often tried to imagine a more mutual bond between the king and queen below. The result was the same. Persephone could not remain forever in the upper world. A settlement was made. She would spend part of the year with Hades and part with Demeter. In one familiar pattern, she remained below for 1/3 of the year and above for 2/3. Later versions often speak of 6 months in each realm, matching 6 pomegranate seeds. When Persephone returned to Demeter, the earth awakened. Green shoots appeared, grain lifted from the fields, trees flowered. The scent of life returned to the air. Mortals could eat again, and offerings once more rose to the gods. When the time came for Persephone to descend, Demeter grieved, and the earth entered its barren season. When daughter and mother reunited, growth returned. This seasonal meaning is often told as though Persephone simply creates winter by going below and spring by coming back. The ancient Mediterranean year was more complicated. In parts of Greece, grain was sown with the autumn rains and withered beneath the heat of summer. Yet the larger pattern remained powerful: disappearance and return, barrenness and growth, death and renewal. A seed buried underground resembles something dead. It is small, dry, and hidden. For a time nothing can be seen. Then, under the right conditions, it opens. A green shoot rises toward the light. Persephone became the divine image of that mystery. She was both the maiden among flowers and the queen among shades. She belonged to 2 homes, 2 identities, and 2 movements of the year. She crossed the boundary that almost no one else could cross, not once but again and again. What did this mean for Hades? For part of each year, his palace had a queen. During the other part, he remained in the old silence. The myths do not often describe his feelings when Persephone leaves. Perhaps the Greeks were more interested in Demeter's grief, which shaped the fields they depended upon. Yet we can imagine the underworld changing with Persephone's absence and return. When she ascends, the halls may seem wider and quieter. The pomegranate trees stand still. Cerberus rests at the gate. Hades resumes his solitary rule, knowing the agreement will bring her back. When she descends, a torch appears in the dark passage. Hecate walks beside her. The queen returns not as the frightened maiden of the first journey, but as a goddess who knows both worlds. Hades rises from his throne. The story does not tell us whether affection grew between them, but later Greek imagination often treated them as a royal pair. Unlike Zeus, whose many loves filled mythology, Hades was rarely given other partners. The marriage that began in violence became, in later images, one of the more stable divine unions. We should not erase the beginning, nor must we imagine that a myth has only one emotional meaning. Persephone can be the taken daughter, the returning child, the mature queen, the sleeping seed, the spring flower, and the guide to mysteries of death. Hades can be the abductor, the husband, the sovereign who shares authority, and the lonely king bound to an ancient bargain. Together they rule the place where endings become beginnings. The pomegranate remains between them, dark red, filled with seeds, sweet and bitter, a fruit of life that creates a bond with death. At Elysium, Demeter taught sacred rites connected with this story. Those who participated were promised a more hopeful relationship with the world below. The exact mysteries remained secret, but their message seems to have rested in the pattern Persephone embodied. What goes down may in some form rise again. Not every person returns from Hades as Persephone does. Mortal death remains mortal death, but grain returns, flowers return, memory returns through story. Children carry the lives of ancestors forward. The earth receives and gives. Hades is part of this cycle, though he does not control all of it. He holds what is hidden. Demeter brings forth what grows. Persephone passes between. And so the seasons turn around a family, divided across the boundary of the world. Chapter 7. Persephone, Queen of the Dead. In the underworld, Persephone became more than the wife of Hades. She became a ruler in her own right. Heroes who descended into the land of the dead sometimes feared her as much as they feared Hades. Poets called her Dread Persephone, Holy Persephone, and the formidable queen below. She could grant a request, send a spirit, or refuse passage. Her transformation is one of the most striking in Greek mythology. In the meadow she was Kore, the maiden, surrounded by companions and flowers. Below she sat upon a throne, receiving the dead of every age. The two identities did not cancel each other. Perhaps this is why Persephone spoke so deeply to the ancient imagination. Human beings often pass through changes that seem like small deaths. Childhood ends. A daughter leaves one household for another. A familiar life disappears. Grief opens a world that did not exist before. The person who returns may be the same and yet not the same. Persephone knew the scent of Narcissus in sunlight and the cold air of the underworld gate. She knew her mother's embrace and the silence of Hades' palace. She knew what it was to be powerless, and she learned how to hold power. Beside her, Hades' kingship also changed. Before Persephone, the underworld could be imagined as a realm ruled by a solitary male god. After her coming, sovereignty was shared by a divine pair. Petitioners might address both. Oaths and curses could call upon both. Their names appeared together in worship. At times, Persephone seemed even more approachable. A soul or hero might ask her to soften the law of Hades. Yet she was not simply gentle. She belonged to the same severe order. One story associated with her concerns Minth, a nymph connected with the underworld river Cocytus. In later accounts, Minth boasted of Hades' love or claimed superiority to Persephone. She was transformed into the mint plant, fragrant when crushed. Versions disagree over whether Persephone or Demeter caused the transformation. Another tale concerns Luce, a nymph whom Hades loved and brought to his realm. After her death, he created the white poplar in her memory. Heracles later crowned himself with its leaves after returning from below. These stories are late and less central than the myth of Persephone, but they show how plants could become memories of the underworld. More often, Hades and Persephone appear as a united royal household. When Orpheus came seeking Eurydice, he sang before them both. When Heracles came for Cerberus, he asked Hades for permission. When Theseus and Pirithous entered with an arrogant plan to seize Persephone herself, both king and queen defended the order of their home. The throne of Persephone was not an ornament. It was the seat of a goddess who had passed through terror and become one of the powers people feared to offend. Hecate remained close to her. In the ancient hymn, Hecate welcomed Persephone after her reunion with Demeter and became her companion and attendant. With torches in hand, she could guide the queen along the road between worlds. We can imagine this yearly descent as a solemn procession. The upper fields have begun to fade. Leaves loosen from branches. The air grows cooler. At a hidden opening in the earth, Hecate waits with two flames. Persephone comes crowned not only with flowers but with the knowledge of darkness. Together they pass below. The dead sense the queen's return. The rivers continue flowing, but something in the realm changes. Cerberus lowers his heads. Charon pauses at the shore. In the palace, Hades waits beside the second throne. Persephone takes her place. For those who encountered her in mystery rites, this image may have contained hope. A goddess who had been taken into death's country had not vanished there. She had become powerful. She could return. She understood both the grief of the living and the silence of the dead. Hades, by contrast, belonged almost entirely below. His authority came from remaining. Persephone's authority came from crossing. Together they formed a balance. Permanence and passage, stillness and return, the closed gate and the road that opens at the appointed time. Their kingdom was not a place the living wished to visit, yet the myths repeatedly sent visitors there. Some came out of love, some came out of duty, some came seeking wisdom, some came through arrogance. And each traveler discovered that the underworld listened closely to the reason for the journey. Chapter 8. Orpheus and the Song in the Dark. Of all the mortals who entered Hades, none came with a weapon more gentle than Orpheus. Orpheus was the greatest musician of Greek mythology. His mother was often said to be Calliope, muse of epic poetry, and his father was sometimes the Thracian king Oeagrus, sometimes Apollo. When Orpheus played the lyre, animals gathered, trees leaned closer, and stones seemed to move. He loved Eurydice. Their happiness was brief. Soon after their marriage, Eurydice was bitten by a snake and died. The world above continued, but for Orpheus it had lost its music. So he decided to descend. Most mortals entered the underworld only as shades, carried there after death. Orpheus went living, guided by grief and song. He found the road downward. He crossed or charmed the river. Cerberus heard the lyre and became still. The restless dead gathered around him. The punishments of Tartarus paused. Sisyphus rested against his stone. Tantalus forgot the water and fruit beyond his reach. Even the Furies were said to weep. At last Orpheus stood before Hades and Persephone. He sang of love, loss, and the law that brings every life below. He did not claim that Eurydice should never die. He asked only that her years be returned for a while. If the request were refused, he said, he would remain among the dead with her. The music entered the silent palace. Hades listened. This is one of the rare moments when the unyielding king was moved to release a soul. Perhaps Persephone, remembering her own separation, felt the song most deeply. Perhaps Hades understood that no kingdom is weakened by one act of mercy. Perhaps even death must sometimes acknowledge love. They agreed. Eurydice could follow Orpheus back to the upper world under one condition. He must not look behind him until they had both reached daylight. The path upward was dark. Orpheus walked ahead. Behind him came the faint step of Eurydice, or perhaps no sound at all. She was still partly a shade. He could not know with certainty that she followed. They climbed. The air grew warmer. The darkness became gray. Somewhere above, birds called in the morning. Orpheus reached the threshold of the living world. Then doubt overcame him. Before Eurydice had fully crossed, he turned. For a moment he saw her. She reached toward him. Then she was drawn backward, fading into the depth. A second death carried her away, and this time no song could reverse the judgment. Orpheus tried to follow, but Charon refused another crossing. He remained beside the river for days, singing to the darkness before returning alone. The story is often told as a lesson about trust, patience, or the danger of looking back. But it is also a story about grief itself. Grief makes us look backward. It asks for one more sight, one more word, one proof that what we loved is still near. Hades' condition was simple and almost impossible. The king below had shown mercy, but the boundary remained. Eurydice returned to the dead, and Orpheus carried her memory through the rest of his life. What did Hades think as the shades came back into his hall? The myth does not say. Perhaps he felt confirmed in his old law. Perhaps Persephone looked away. Perhaps the final note of Orpheus' music remained in the palace long after the singer had gone. The tale reveals something essential about Hades. He could be moved. He could grant an exception. But he did not endlessly reopen a decision. Death might bend once under perfect music and then close again. In the deep silence, even mercy has a limit. Chapter 9. Heracles at the Gate. If Orpheus entered the underworld with music, Heracles entered with strength. Heracles, son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, was commanded to perform 12 great labors. The final and most fearsome task was to bring Cerberus from the realm of Hades into the world above. No ordinary man could expect to return from such a journey. Before descending, Heracles was initiated into the mysteries at Elysium in some versions of the story. The rites prepared him to cross the sacred boundary and purified him for contact with the dead. He entered through a cave at Cape Taenarum in the southern Peloponnese, one of several places the Greeks imagined as mouths of the underworld. The opening lay near the sea, where dark stone and deep water made the landscape feel like an edge between worlds. Heracles passed down through the earth. Among the shades he encountered were heroes and monsters, friends and strangers. He saw Meleager, whose sorrow moved him. He saw the Gorgon Medusa and at first reached for his sword, until Hermes reminded him that the dead were only insubstantial images. At last he came before Hades. Heracles did not simply steal Cerberus. He asked the king's permission. Hades agreed on a condition. The hero could take the hound if he mastered him without using weapons. Heracles approached Cerberus wearing only the lion's skin as protection. The hound's head snapped, and the serpents around his body struck, but Heracles closed his arms around the creature and held on. Strength met strength in the darkness. At last Cerberus yielded. Hades kept his word. Heracles led the hound upward and presented him to King Eurystheus, who was so terrified that he hid inside a great storage jar. The labor complete, Heracles returned Cerberus safely to the underworld. This detail matters. Cerberus was not slain. The guardian returned to his post. Heracles proved that he could pass the boundary, but he did not destroy it. The story also shows Hades acting with fairness. He set terms, and when they were met, he honored the agreement. The underworld king was severe but not dishonest. During the descent, Heracles also found Theseus and Pirithous. These two heroes had made a reckless pact. Each wished to marry a daughter of Zeus. Theseus helped Pirithous attempt the most impossible choice of all, Persephone, queen of the underworld. They entered Hades as living men, not to ask humbly for passage or wisdom, but to take the queen from her throne. Hades welcomed them with deceptive calm and invited them to sit. The seats held them fast. They became trapped upon the chairs of forgetfulness, unable to rise. Their strength and cleverness meant nothing in the king's own hall. When Heracles found them, he pulled Theseus free with great effort. In some versions, part of Theseus remained attached to the seat. When Heracles tried to free Pirithous, the earth shook, warning him to stop. Pirithous remained below. The contrast with Orpheus is clear. Orpheus came for someone he loved and asked through song. Heracles came under command and respected the king's conditions. Theseus and Pirithous came with arrogance, treating the underworld as a place they could raid. Hades answered each according to the nature of the visit. Another clever mortal, Sisyphus, tried to defeat the kingdom in a different way. Sisyphus was king of Corinth and famous for cunning. When Thanatos came to bind him, Sisyphus tricked death and placed him in chains. While Thanatos remained captive, no one on earth could die. Warriors were wounded but did not pass away. The natural order stopped. At last Ares, frustrated that battle had lost its conclusion, freed Thanatos and delivered Sisyphus to the underworld. But Sisyphus had prepared another trick. Before dying, he told his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites. Once below, he complained that he had been dishonored and persuaded Persephone, or in some tellings Hades, to let him return briefly to correct the matter. Back in the sunlight, Sisyphus refused to come down again. He lived until old age before death returned and brought him permanently below. His punishment became endless. He pushed a heavy stone up a hill, only to have it roll down whenever he approached the summit. Sisyphus' crime was not merely cleverness. Greek heroes often survived through intelligence. His deeper offense was the attempt to make an exception permanent, to enjoy life without accepting the law that governed everyone else. Hades could permit a return for Persephone, Orpheus, or Heracles under precise terms. What he would not accept was the destruction of the boundary itself. The underworld was patient. A mortal might delay the journey. No mortal could cancel it forever. Chapter 10. Voices of the Dead. Not every traveler entered Hades to rescue a loved one or complete a labor. Some came seeking knowledge. In the Odyssey, Odysseus sailed to the edge of the world to consult the spirit of the prophet Tiresias. The journey was not always described as a physical walk through Hades' palace. Instead, Odysseus reached a remote land beside the ocean, dug a trench, poured offerings, and called the dead upward. The shades gathered. Without blood, they drifted without full awareness. After drinking from the offering, they could speak and remember. Odysseus first met the spirit of his companion Elpenor, who had died without burial. Elpenor begged him to return and perform the proper rites. Again, the myths remind us that care for the dead was a sacred obligation. Then came Anticlea, Odysseus' mother. He had not known she was dead. When she drank, she recognized him and told him of the home he had left behind, his faithful wife Penelope, his growing son Telemachus, and his elderly father Laertes. She had died not from violence, she said, but from longing for her absent son. Odysseus tried 3 times to embrace her. 3 times his arms closed on air. The scene captures the sorrow of the Greek shade. Memory remains, love remains, but the body does not. The dead can speak for a moment, yet they cannot be held. Tiresias finally approached and gave Odysseus the knowledge he needed. He warned him of dangers still to come, and described the path by which he might return home. Other famous dead appeared. Agamemnon told of his murder. Achilles came, and Odysseus praised him as honored among the dead. Achilles answered that he would rather serve as a poor laborer among the living than rule over all the vanished souls. These words reveal how early Greek poetry often imagined Hades. Glory did not make death desirable. Even the greatest warrior longed for sunlight. Later traditions offered more hope through Elysium, blessed islands, purification, and mystery rites. But the Homeric underworld remained pale and melancholy. It gave urgency to life. To breathe, eat, work, love, and stand beneath the sun were extraordinary gifts precisely because they ended. Hades presided over this great memory of humanity. Every lost city continued as voices below. Every battle sent warriors toward the same fields. Every family had ancestors there. The dead were not always forgotten. Greeks poured libations at tombs, held funeral games, spoke names, and visited graves. Heroes received cult worship in the places associated with their bones. The boundary between living and dead was strong, but memory crossed it. In tragedies, the dead could influence the present. A murdered person might demand justice. An ancestor might appear in a dream. Blood spilled within a family could awaken the Furies. The underworld was not merely a distant destination. It was the moral depth beneath human actions. Hades himself remained in the background of many such stories. This absence suited him. A king does not need to stand at every grave to hold authority over the realm. His presence was the certainty behind the ritual. When a coin was placed with a body, Charon was remembered. When wine was poured into the earth, the powers below were honored. When a name was spoken at a tomb, the silent kingdom was acknowledged. The living continued beneath Zeus' sky, upon Poseidon's seas, and above Hades' ground. All three brothers were present in every human life. The sky gave rain and weather. The sea carried ships and storms. The earth provided grain, metal, and finally a resting place. Hades was never far away. He was simply unseen. Chapter 11. The Worship of the King Below. The ancient Greeks approached Hades with restraint. They worshipped him, but not with the easy familiarity offered to some other gods. To call the Lord of the Underworld was to invite the attention of a power whose realm every mortal would eventually enter. His name might be replaced by respectful titles. The wealthy one, the receiver of many, the host of all, the good counselor, or simply the Lord below. At Elysium, in the western Peloponnese, there was a temple of Hades said to open only once each year. Only the priest was permitted to enter. Whether every detail of this tradition was practiced exactly as later writers described, the story expresses the god's distance. His sanctuary was not an ordinary public gathering place. At other sites, Hades was honored together with Persephone and Demeter. Their identities were woven into farming, the dead, and the cycle of growth. Chthonic rituals often took place at night. Offerings were directed downward. Instead of raising hands toward the sky, worshippers might lower them or strike the earth. Libations of water, wine, milk, or honey could be poured into a pit. The difference between Olympian and chthonic worship was not always absolute, but it reflected the direction of attention. Some gods belonged to light and height. Others belonged to the ground beneath the feet. At funerals, the family washed and prepared the body, held mourning rites, and carried the dead to burial. The grave became a place of memory and continued relationship. Offerings might be made on anniversaries or at festivals for the dead. These customs were for the person who had died, but they also recognized the order of Hades. People prayed not necessarily to avoid his realm forever, which was impossible for mortals, but for a proper time, a peaceful passage, and a favorable place among the dead. The mysteries at Elysium offered perhaps the strongest religious hope connected with Hades and Persephone. Initiates came from many parts of the Greek world. They fasted, processed along the sacred way, carried torches, performed rites, and entered the great hall known as the Telesterion. What happened inside was kept secret. Ancient testimony suggests that participants saw sacred objects, heard words, and experienced a revelation that transformed their understanding of life and death. The story of Demeter and Persephone stood at the center, a goddess lost, a mother searching, a descent, a return, and grain rising again. Hades remained the necessary darkness within that promise. There can be no return without a place from which to return. There can be no seedling without the seed's hidden season. There can be no harvest without burial in the soil. This did not make Hades gentle in every story. It made him part of a complete world. The Romans later identified him with Dis-Pater and Pluto. As Pluto, he became even more closely associated with mineral and agricultural wealth. Roman poets retold the abduction of Proserpina, their name for Persephone, and artists across later centuries returned to the image of the chariot, the pomegranate, and the divided year. But the worship of Hades was never simply the worship of fear. It was the recognition of limit. A field cannot be harvested forever without rest. A life cannot continue unchanged without end. A promise matters because time is not infinite. The dead deserve honor because they have passed beyond the reach of ordinary repair. Hades held these truths without apology. He was not loved as Apollo was loved for music, or Athena for wise protection, or Aphrodite for beauty. But he was respected as one of the great powers by which the cosmos remained whole. Chapter 12. Hades, Death and the Meaning of the Unseen. Over time, the image of Hades became confused with ideas from other religions. In modern stories, he is often made the villain of Olympus, plotting against Zeus, commanding flames, or seeking to destroy the living world. Such portrayals can create dramatic adventures, but they differ from the older Greek god. Hades did not lead a rebellion against Olympus after the Titanomachy. He was not the Greek equivalent of Satan. He did not tempt mortals into evil. He did not rule a kingdom opposed to the gods. He was an Olympian by birth, even if he rarely lived on Olympus. His authority came from the same division of the cosmos that gave Zeus the sky and Poseidon the sea. The underworld itself was not identical to the later idea of hell. It contained punishment, but also ordinary shades, blessed fields, deep prisons, rivers, judges, and a royal palace. It was a whole world of the dead. Understanding this changes the mood of Hades' story. He is less a monster and more a boundary. A boundary can frighten us because it cannot be argued away, yet boundaries also give shape. A shoreline makes the sea visible. Night makes us notice light. Silence allows a note of music to be heard. Mortality gives weight to life. The ancient Greeks did not all agree about what came after death. Poets described shades. Philosophers imagined judgment, purification, rebirth, or the separation of soul and body. Mystery religions offered sacred hope. Families remembered ancestors in practical rites. Hades stood at the meeting point of all these possibilities. His helmet of invisibility became a fitting symbol. Death is present in every life, yet most of the time it remains outside our sight. The earth beneath a garden contains generations of fallen leaves and forgotten things, but flowers grow over them. A city is built above older cities. A family speaks with words inherited from people long gone. The unseen supports the seen. Hades' wealth was therefore not only gold, it was the vast inheritance beneath the present. Every story handed down from the past comes, in a sense, from the realm of memory. Homer, the ancient singers, the sculptors, worshippers, farmers, and sailors who once spoke the name of Hades have all entered the world they imagined. Yet their thoughts remain with us. The king below rules the dead, but he cannot prevent the living from remembering them. This may be one reason myths endure. They create a road across the boundary. Orpheus loses Eurydice, but we still speak her name. Achilles becomes a shade, but his story remains bright. Persephone descends, but returns in every retelling. Hades stays unseen, but his kingdom fills art, poetry, and dreams. His story also asks us to look beneath appearances. A field in winter may seem empty, but seeds wait below. A dark cave may be an entrance, a shelter, or a sacred place. Grief may feel like the end of the world, yet the person who carries it can become deeper and stronger. Silence may contain more than noise can reveal. Hades himself changes when seen in this way. He is still the god who took Persephone. He is still severe and difficult to persuade. He is still the keeper of a gate most people fear. But he is also the brother who survived Cronus, the warrior who helped defeat the Titans, the god who honored his agreement with Heracles, the ruler moved by the music of Orpheus, and the king who shares his throne with a powerful queen. He is the receiver, not always the destroyer. He is the end of the road, but not the cause of every ending. He is darkness, but darkness is not always evil. As our journey nears its close, imagine the underworld not as a place of sudden terror, but as an ancient landscape at rest. The River Styx moves slowly through the distance. Charon's boat reaches the shore. Cerberus lies before the gate, one head wakeful while the others sleep. In the asphodel fields, countless shades drift like mist. Farther on stands the palace. Its doors are tall and dark. Within, lamps burn with a low, unearthly light. Hades sits upon his throne, scepter in hand. Beside him sits Persephone, crowned as queen. A pomegranate rests upon a stone table between them. There is no thunder here, no wave breaks, no sun rises. Yet the realm is not empty. It holds every song that has ended, every footstep that has faded, every crown laid down, every hand once held, every name carried into memory. Above, the earth turns through night. Roots deepen in the soil. Seeds wait for rain. In distant homes, families sleep. The stars move over mountains, unaware of the kingdom beneath them. When the appointed season comes, Persephone will rise. Demeter will welcome her. The fields will awaken. Hades will remain below, as he always has, guarding the unseen half of the world. And so we come to the end of tonight's journey through the complete story of Hades. We began before Olympus, in the first age of earth and sky. We followed the child swallowed by Cronus, the brother freed by Zeus, and the warrior who carried the helmet of darkness into the war of the Titans. We watched the three brothers divide the cosmos, Zeus receiving the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the kingdom beneath the earth. We crossed the rivers of the underworld, passed Charon's boat and Cerberus at the gate, and wandered through the fields of asphodel, the distant peace of Elysium, and the deep prison of Tartarus. We followed Persephone from the flowered meadow into darkness, and from darkness back into her mother's arms. We saw how the pomegranate bound her to two worlds, and how a frightened maiden became a powerful queen. We listened as Orpheus sang in the palace of the dead. We watched Heracles master Cerberus and return him safely. We saw Sisyphus try to outwit the boundary, and Odysseus reach through memory to hear the voices of those he had lost. Through all these stories, Hades remained what he had always been, hidden, patient, stern, and necessary. He was not the enemy of life. He was the keeper of its ending. He was not the source of evil. He was the ruler of a realm that even gods treated with respect. And he was not only the god of death, but the wealthy one, lord of metals, roots, seeds, ancestors, and all that rests beneath the surface of the world. Let the underworld grow quiet now. Let Charon draw his boat onto the shore. Let Cerberus rest before the gate. Let the shades move peacefully through the pale fields. In the palace, Persephone sets down her torch. Hades lowers his scepter. The rivers continue their slow journey through the dark. Far above them, a seed sleeps beneath winter soil. It does not know the shape of the flower it will become. It asks for no light yet. It waits in silence held by the earth. And when the season turns, it will rise. Ancient legends, endless journeys, peaceful nights.